Less than a week until Donald Trump is sworn in as president, and as Canadians look to see what happens with the threat of tariffs, we have Alberta Premier Danielle Smith talking about a national unity crisis, and Ontario Premier Doug Ford talking about an early election. To weigh in on this is Brian Lilley, columnist with the Toronto Sun. Brian, welcome back. Great to have you once again.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Okay, so political leaders across the country appear to be freaking out about Trump's tariff talk. We're calling it Trump's tariff talk. So is this warranted?
Absolutely, because we don't know what's coming. And a 25% tariff on the Canadian economy would be massive. So, I mean, just for Alberta's sake, generally speaking, Western Canadian select oil trades at a discount of about 18 to 20%, roughly speaking. I mean, people will forgive me if I'm slightly off on what today's spot price is, but it's about 18 to 20% discount. So you slap a 25% tariff on that. If the Americans do that to Canadian oil exports to the United States, well, suddenly Alberta oil is more expensive than West Texas Intermediate, which is the benchmark for the United States. Okay, well, are they going to still buy it? Well, in some instances, yes, they will because they have to. Alberta oil tends to be heavier. We're not talking sweet Texas crude. We're talking a heavier oil that's used in a lot of industrial products. It's used in things like asphalt. And so they're going to need that still, or they're going to have to buy it from Venezuela or Iran or places like that where they don't want to be doing business. But that's going to cause problems. You look at auto exports from Canada to the US. Yes, we assemble a lot of cars here, but the big business now are automotive parts, and parts will go back and forth across the border. You know, we keep hearing this 7 or 8 times, and so you might start out with a part made in a plant in southwestern Ontario, and it goes across to Michigan and gets something else added to it, and then it goes to a different factory, it gets something else added to it, and then it gets put into the assembled car. Well, so are we going to have a tariff of 25% each time it crosses the border? If so, that's going to be problematic. You think about fish, you think about lobster, you think about lumber, all the products that we sell to the United States. This is a massive disruption to the Canadian economy and one that we can ill afford.
Yeah. Now, Alberta Premier Smith just got back from a chummy trip with Trump, although she has been very blunt that she doesn't want any tariffs on Alberta oil, and she doesn't want the federal government to block oil exports either. So how is her message being received in central and eastern Canada, Brian?
So, Danielle Smith is speaking up for her province, and she is saying, look, we want an exemption. We don't think there should be tariffs on oil. Now, that said, in her media availability after Mar-a-Lago on Monday morning, she was very blunt. We should all expect these tariffs to come in, and they're going to hit all of us. So that includes Alberta oil, but she doesn't want it on there. That message is being seen as not being a team player among some other premiers and business leaders, because there is the possibility, because of how much oil that the Americans import from Canada, there is the possibility that there could be a carve out for that. Well, if there's a carve out for that, why not auto parts? Why not softwood lumber? Why not something else? And so if we're all going to get hit, the feeling is that we should all work together. Now, Premier Smith rightly feels that, okay, look, we've got a government in Ottawa that has been doing everything in its power to undermine the oil and gas sector. I mean, they shut down Energy East. They stopped Northern Gateway Pipeline. They have stopped other export avenues for Alberta oil and gas, or Saskatchewan oil and gas, or to an even more limited degree from Manitoba. So all of this is being shut down. And now you want to use Alberta oil and gas as a leveraging chip? Excuse me. Why is it suddenly a great industry now when you need it to fight back against Trump tariffs? But before that, the Trudeau Liberals were trying to shut it down with emissions caps, production caps, everything else. The Bill C-69, the No More Pipelines bill, So I understand where she's coming from, but if you're sitting out here, you can also look at where other premiers are coming from and say, all right, are we fighting as a team or are we not? Both sides have valid arguments.
Right. And of course, you mentioned the premiers there, and all premiers will be meeting with Prime Minister Trudeau on Wednesday. And so while they are doing this and they're trying to make it look like they're united, it doesn't seem like they are. And a lot of people in Alberta are expecting that the other premiers are going to gang up on Alberta Premier Danielle Smith along with the Prime Minister. So is this a valid fear?
I would say so. Look, I've spoken to several premiers over the past few weeks about this. Premier Ford, Premier Fury in Newfoundland, Premier Smith, Premier Moe, and we've heard from others that I haven't spoken to directly. Premier Fury out in Newfoundland and Labrador, he just wants to fight the Americans, was my takeaway. Okay, well, that's great. Newfoundland and Labrador, guess what? They don't have a direct border connection with the United States. They're a very small population. They're a very small economy. Doesn't matter to them compared to Alberta or even more so Ontario. You talk to David Eby in British Columbia. He wants to fight the Americans. It's this anti-American, let's go, rah, rah. Look, I get that can be a bit of a rallying cry, but economically, it is stupid. So, which is the better view between Danielle Smith, who doesn't want to threaten anything, and Doug Ford, who says, look, I want to make a deal with you, but if you don't, I will hit back hard. Doug Ford has threatened to cut off energy exports from Ontario. Now, that's not oil and gas. That is, electricity exports to New York State, to Pennsylvania, to Michigan. A lot of people will look at that and say, that's how you deal with Donald Trump. Others will say, no, Danielle Smith has the better way. I don't know which one's going to work because Donald Trump is so unpredictable, let's say. But when you look at this as a whole, I get where Danielle Smith is coming from when she says, look at a map. You threatened to cut off oil exports to the United States, which Melanie Joly, Trudeau's foreign affairs minister, did. What did Premier Smith say? Look at a map, figure out where Line 5 goes. Before Line 5 gets to Ontario, Sarnia, Ontario, where 50% of the jet fuel for Pearson Airport is processed, it goes through Michigan. Well, if we've got to send it through Michigan, where they take a lot of product off, well, guess what? They can stop it from going through to Ontario, which then also feeds Ontario, but also Quebec via Line 9. There's a lot of moving parts here, Jeanette. This is a very difficult time that we're in.
Yeah, totally. And you mentioned Premier Ford there. So why is Ford talking about possibly needing to go to an early election due to the tariffs?
So Ontario has a fixed election date law, which in a Westminster parliamentary system like we all have in Canada, that means absolutely nothing. As I've been saying since these laws first started to pop up, they are worthless. You can break them at any time. Pretty much the first or second line in every version of a fixed election date law I've seen in Canada says nothing precludes the governor general or the lieutenant governor from exercising their duty, meaning calling an early election. And so Ford is looking at an election in June of 2026, and he's been toying with the idea, even before the Trump tariffs, of going early just for political expediency. Now his argument is he may have to spend tens of billions of dollars. We're talking 50, 80, $100 billion over the next year or two to prop up companies and workforces here in the province of Ontario in order to deal with the tariffs. If the tariffs start coming in, maybe, he hasn't said what he'll do, but I'll point to this. When Trump brought in all kinds of tariffs on China, it did not end up killing off Chinese exports because the Chinese government subsidized them. So does the Ontario government backstop companies that have to pay these tariffs? Do they sell at a 25% discount so that it ends up being the same? We're going to have to wait and see. But the province has run the numbers, and they say that it's between 450 to 500,000 people could lose their jobs as a result of these tariffs. That's massive. Right now in the province, we've got a high unemployment rate of 7.5%. That's 662,000 people unemployed at the moment. You add another 500,000 to that, you're talking about an economy that is cratering. And so Ford says if he's got to spend that kind of money, he thinks that he should take it to the voters and let them decide if they back that idea or if they want to shut it down.
My gosh. Okay, well, speaking of voting, it looks like the Liberal leadership race is sort of ramping up here with Trudeau's decision to step down. So we're now seeing a few people come forward, even though Liberals say that they're going to tighten their rules for who can vote. But you say there's a real problem with this race, and you're calling for all parties to change their rules. Why, Brian?
Yeah, absolutely. All parties need to change their rules. The Liberals have the loosest rules, but they're not the only ones that don't follow the rules that we have for a general election. My oldest son, who's now in his mid-20s, he voted in his first leadership race for the Conservative Party of Canada when he was 16. What business does a 16-year-old have voting in a leadership race when they can't vote in a general election?
Interesting.
So,
Yeah.
but if you're voting inside the Conservative Party, you've got to be a citizen or a permanent resident. Until this past week, the Liberals, they would allow non-citizens to vote. You just had to ordinarily reside in the district. So we heard all about that in the foreign interference inquiry. We had Chinese exchange students voting to support Han Dong, the Liberal candidate in Don Valley North. People in Toronto can't find Don Valley North on a map. I bet you can't out in Lethbridge. But the Chinese government could, and they were interested in that. So do you think they're going to be interested in trying to manipulate in any way they can the leadership of the Liberal Party of Canada, which if you win the leadership of the Liberal Party of Canada, guess what? You are the de facto prime minister of a G7 country. The Liberals have said, oh no, we're not going to allow non-citizens to vote anymore. We're just going to allow citizens and permanent residents. Well, wait a minute. Permanent residents are not citizens, and they're not allowed to vote in a general election. I think that whether it's the Liberals, the New Democrats, the Bloc, the Conservatives, if you are a federal party that wants to contest in a federal election, Elections Canada should say to you that every nomination you have and every leadership election you have, you must follow the same rules as Elections Canada lays out in a general election. A couple of years ago, Jeanette, if you had asked me that, I would have said, no, these are private clubs. We don't need the government involved. But we've seen through the foreign interference inquiry what's happened. And now, do you remember when Pierre Poilievre announced he was running to be leader of the Conservative Party, and he said, I'm running to be Prime Minister of Canada? And the Liberals all scoffed, nobody runs to be Prime Minister of Canada. Elizabeth May even said that recently when Donald Trump suggested Wayne Gretzky run to be Prime Minister. She said, nobody runs to be Prime Minister. Well, guess what? Since Justin Trudeau stepped down, we've got a bunch of Liberals running to be Prime Minister of Canada. And people who are not allowed to vote in a general election will help select our new PM. That is crazy.
Right. And you mentioned your son being 16 when he voted. Well, I think the rules now are 14, right? So the age limit's going down.
Yeah, 14 for the Liberals. I believe it's 14 in the NDP, but they would not allow people who were not permanent residents to vote. The Liberals had the loosest rules. They've tightened them up, but only slightly. And that's why we need to come to a common system for all parties. And I think it should be what we use in a general election.
Right. Yeah. We're almost out of time here, but speaking of this Liberal leadership race, we've seen more people announce that they're dropping out of the leadership race than jumping in, it seems. And we haven't heard much from former Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland, although I believe she has forms up on the Liberal website to collect the signatures required to enter the race. So we might be hearing from her soon. But it looks like both Mark Carney and former BC Premier Christy Clark have been active. But Brian, you say Not all of it's good. Why do you
Well,
say
yeah, I
this?
mean, last week, Christy Clark did an interview with CBC where she denied that she had ever been a member of the Conservative Party, even though she had boasted about joining the Conservative Party to vote for Jean Charest to try and stop Pierre Poilievre. In 2020, she mused about running for the Conservative leadership after Andrew Scheer dropped out. And so, look, there's a lot of problems with Christy Clark. She may have killed off her own campaign before it even started. Mark Carney has had to answer questions about why he was hanging around with a woman who is now known as one of the world's most well-known and renowned sex traffickers back in 2013. That's long before she was ever charged. But why was she there? Well, he gave an understandable explanation. Longtime friend of his sister-in-law. He didn't know anything about what was going on. All of that. He's also, facing questions about why he basically announced his candidacy on the Jon Stewart show, on the Daily Show in the United States. So, a few different things going on. Freeland's been fairly quiet, but she's expected to jump in. We've also got a lot of also-rans saying that they're going to run, but at $350,000 an entrance fee, good luck raising that if you're not a serious contender.
Oh my goodness, exactly. Unfortunately, we're out of time here, Brian, but once again, thanks so much for joining us. Always a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you.